What if rock's most iconic love song was actually a confession of betrayal? Eric Clapton's Layla wasn't just about heartbreak, it was about his obsession with his best friend's wife. This is the story of a forbidden love that nearly destroyed Clapton, shattered his friendship with George Harrison, and turned one woman into the most famous muse in rock history. After this, you'll never hear Layla the same way again. George, Clapton, and Patty. A beautiful beginning. In the late 1960s, George Harrison and Eric Clapton were more than just two of the most revered musicians in the world. They were like brothers. While the Beatles were redefining pop music, Clapton was emerging as the guitar god of British blues rock. Their bond was rare in a world of egos and fame. They traded musical ideas, collaborated on projects, and even shared spiritual interests. Enter Pattie Boyd. Pattie was more than just a muse. She was a cultural icon in her own right. A successful model, she was the face of the swinging 60s in London, appearing on magazine covers and in Vogue spreads. She had an effortless charm, a disarming beauty, and a poetic presence that seemed to inspire everyone who met her. George was instantly taken when they met on the set of A Hard Day's Night. Within 2 years, they were married. But here's where things start to twist. Clapton met Pattie through George, and from the very first encounter, he was captivated. But this wasn't some casual infatuation. According to friends, he became fixated. Pattie, in his eyes, was perfection, graceful, unattainable, and painfully out of reach. It didn't help that she was already the love of his best friend's life. Instead of backing away, Clapton allowed the feeling to consume him. He didn't flirt. He didn't make a move. He brooded, privately, intensely. He began to write her letters under a false name, Lancelot, comparing his love for her to tragic heroes in romantic legends. And while Pattie was reportedly confused and flattered, she remained faithful to George. But things were already shifting under the surface, because this wasn't a love triangle, not yet. It was a countdown. Clapton spirals, obsession turns to addiction. Eric Clapton didn't just fall for Pattie Boyd, he unraveled because of her. Watching George and Pattie together was like slow torture. Every dinner, every party, every shared studio session, it was a reminder that the woman he loved belonged to someone else. Not just someone, but the one person he admired most, his best friend. But obsession doesn't obey boundaries. It doesn't care about loyalty or vows or friendship. Clapton once described the pain as unbearable. He wasn't exaggerating. By 1970, that pain had driven him into isolation and into heroin. He later admitted that his addiction started as an escape. If he couldn't have Pattie, he didn't want to feel anything at all. He locked himself away for 3 years, barely making music, refusing interviews, disappearing from the public eye. People thought he'd vanished. In truth, he was drowning, emotionally, physically, spiritually. The irony, Pattie had no idea how deep his feelings ran. To her, Clapton was a friend of George's, maybe a little flirtatious, a bit intense, but she had no clue he was spiraling over her. Clapton masked the obsession from most people, but those closest to him saw it. His behavior changed. He grew more erratic, more volatile. He once even confronted Pattie, confessing his love in a moment of emotional collapse, only to be rejected. She told him gently but firmly, she loved George. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. Because Clapton didn't walk away. He did what artists do. He turned his pain into something else, something louder, something that couldn't be ignored. Layla was already forming in his mind, but it wouldn't just be a song, it would be a scream. Layla is born, a love letter in disguise. With his emotions eating him alive, Clapton did the only thing he knew how to do. He picked up his guitar. But this time, it wasn't just about writing a hit. It was about survival, about exercising the torment of loving someone he could never rightfully claim. Then, like fate throwing him a lifeline, Clapton stumbled upon an ancient Persian love story, Layla and Majnun. The tale was hauntingly familiar. A man so consumed by his love for a woman he couldn't have, he eventually descended into madness. The parallel was almost too perfect. Clapton saw himself in Majnun's desperation, trapped between devotion and despair, endlessly circling a love that would only destroy him. And that was it. The dam broke. In a feverish burst of inspiration, Clapton unleashed his agony into one explosive track, Desperation. rage, longing, hopelessness. Every raw nerve was exposed. "You've got me on my knees, Layla. I'm begging, darling, please." This wasn't just a love song. It was a man unraveling before the world, bleeding into every note. But Clapton knew releasing something this personal could ignite a firestorm, especially with George so close. To mask his identity, he formed Derek and the Dominoes, a thin veil to hide behind. If George heard it, maybe he wouldn't connect the dots, at least not immediately. And then came Duane Allman, the secret weapon. Allman's slide guitar sliced through the song like a second voice, a tortured scream echoing Clapton's pain. The two guitars wept and wailed together, capturing a level of emotional violence rarely heard in rock. That riff didn't just become iconic, it became the sound of heartbreak itself. When Layla was finally released, it didn't skyrocket up the charts, not right away. But the people who heard it, really heard it, felt something they couldn't quite explain. The anguish was undeniable, even if the full story was still hidden. For now. But secrets like this don't stay buried forever. The explosion was coming. Harrison finds out. Silence speaks louder. When Layla finally hit the airwaves, it didn't scream its secrets out loud, but for those who knew the players involved, it didn't have to. George Harrison heard it, and he knew. How could he not? The lyrics were too personal, too raw, too revealing. The song wasn't just a heartbreak anthem, it was a full-blown confession. And the subject of that confession was living in his house, wearing his ring, sleeping beside him every night. But instead of confronting Clapton or exploding in anger, George Harrison chose silence. It wasn't passive, it was calculated. Harrison was, by then, deep into Eastern spirituality. He had embraced meditation, transcendence, and letting go of ego. But beneath that calm exterior was pain, deep, unspoken pain. In private, the tension was undeniable. Harrison had started to distance himself from Patty even before Layla dropped. Their once golden marriage had dulled. George was often cold, preoccupied, and, by Patty's later account, increasingly unfaithful. Clapton may have been writing love letters, but George had begun to stray. Still, the betrayal cut deep. Clapton had been like a brother. They had shared guitars, stages, hotel rooms, and years of musical dreams. Now, he had shared something else, something sacred. But George didn't retaliate. There were no screaming matches, no fists, no headlines. Instead, he retreated inward. The spiritual beetle, the quiet one, simply stepped back from the chaos and watched. And Patty? She was caught in the middle. Her husband wasn't the man she married anymore, and the man who had written one of the most desperate love songs in history was still hovering, waiting. The storm hadn't passed. It was still building. Patty walks away, from a beetle to a domino. By the mid-1970s, Patty Boyd had become more of a ghost in her own marriage than a wife. The love that once lit up her life with George Harrison had dimmed. What had started as a whirlwind romance, full of laughter, music, and spiritual discovery, was now cold, quiet, and fractured. George had grown distant, detached, and the rumors weren't just whispers anymore. They were facts. He was having affairs, multiple ones. One of them, shockingly, with Ringo Starr's wife, Maureen. Patty tried to hold on. She tried to save their marriage, but the emotional void was impossible to ignore. She later admitted she felt invisible, like a shadow trailing behind George's fame and spiritual journey. Their once magical connection had been replaced by long silences and closed doors. And then, Clapton came back into the picture. No longer the strung-out addict, Eric had resurfaced, sober, focused, still obsessed. And this time, he wasn't hiding it. He declared his love again, directly, boldly, and in person. But Patty wasn't swept off her feet, not immediately. She had just emerged from one emotional wreckage. She wasn't eager to step into another. But then Clapton did something unexpected. He invited her to his estate for a party. It was low-key, casual, until he picked up a guitar in front of the guests and performed a song just for her. A new one. A quiet, aching melody. It wasn't Layla. It was Wonderful Tonight. The message was crystal clear. He was still in love, still waiting. And this time, Patty couldn't walk away. In 1974, after years of confusion, guilt, and emotional tug-of-war, she left George. She walked out of one legend's life and into another's arms. The world was stunned. The press had a field day, and behind the scenes, two of rock's most powerful men were now officially on opposite sides of a broken love story. The fairy tale crumbles. Clapton loses her too. Eric Clapton had finally won. After years of obsession, heartbreak, and addiction, he got the girl. Patty Boyd was no longer a fantasy. No longer married to George, she was his wife now. They married in 1979 in Tucson, Arizona, surrounded by friends, rock royalty, and photographers who couldn't believe the triangle had come full circle. It should have been the happily ever after ending, but it wasn't, because the man Patty had married was not the same one who wrote Layla. That Eric, heartbroken, poetic, desperate, had been replaced by someone darker, someone numb. The years of heroin addiction had given way to something else, alcohol, and this time, the damage wasn't hidden in hotel rooms. It was on full display. Clapton began drinking heavily, disappearing for days, sometimes weeks. The obsession that once seemed romantic now looked like self-destruction. He cheated, repeatedly, brazenly, at times even in front of Patty. In her memoir, she recalled one moment at a party when Eric left with another woman while she sat in the next room, pretending not to notice. The woman he had chased for years was now treated like furniture. Clapton, in interviews, admitted he didn't know how to be in a relationship. He thought that once he had Patty, the longing would end. But the truth? He wasn't in love with the real woman. He was in love with the idea of her. Patty stayed for nearly a decade, hoping things would get better. But they didn't. She left him in 1988. No drama, no spotlight, just quiet heartbreak. She had been the muse for Layla, the inspiration behind Wonderful Tonight, and the center of rock's most iconic love triangle. But in the end, she walked away from both men, lonely, drained, and searching for herself. The fairy tale was over, and all that was left was the music. The strange reunion, laughter after loss. For a love triangle built on obsession, betrayal, and heartbreak, what happened next was unexpected. Time passed, decades turned, and somehow, the bitterness that once tore them apart began to fade. In a strange, almost surreal twist, George Harrison, Eric Clapton, and Patty Boyd would all reunite, publicly and privately. Not in courtrooms, not through tabloids, but as friends, or something close to it. In the early 90s, George and Eric were spotted laughing together at events. Not forced smiles, but real ones. The same men who had once silently dueled over the same woman were now sharing stages again, trading solos like old times. The cold distance between them had melted into something more peaceful. At one point, George even joked about the triangle, saying, "I don't mind that Eric had my wife. I was finished with her anyway." It was dark humor, sure, but it revealed something deeper, acceptance, maybe even forgiveness. Patty, too, was welcomed back into the circle, not as someone torn between two men, but as a person finally allowed to exist outside of their shadows. The muse had become her own story again. And then came the final, emotional chapter. In 2001, when George Harrison passed away from cancer, it was Eric Clapton who organized and performed at the tribute concert, not just as a musician, but as a brother saying goodbye. Clapton didn't just mourn George, he honored him. Through music, through tears, through an unspoken understanding that time had healed what ego had once destroyed. Layla lived on, so did Something, so did Wonderful Tonight, all songs about one woman, Patty Boyd. But what survived beyond the heartbreak was something rarer than hit records, grace. 3 lives, twisted together by passion, finally untangled, not with rage, but with peace. The song that screamed a secret. Layla isn't just a song, it's a confession, a cry for something forbidden, a friendship shattered, a love that never truly worked. Eric Clapton thought winning Patty would heal him. It didn't. George Harrison chose silence over confrontation, and lost her anyway. And Patty? She became the face of one of rock's most tragic love stories, without ever asking for it. But time did something the music couldn't. It healed. Clapton and Harrison made peace. Patty found her own path. And the song? It lived on, forever linked to obsession, heartbreak, and forgiveness. So next time you hear Layla, remember, it wasn't just about love. It was about everything love can destroy and everything it can't fix. If you love diving into the untold stories behind music's greatest hits, make sure to subscribe and join us for more. The legends have only just begun.